Well, welcome everybody to this edition of our TouchPoint webinar. This week, today I should say, we have Keith Duff joining us from Village Bible out in the Chicagoland area, and we're going to be talking about embracing TouchPoint. So for your host today, you have myself and Keith, obviously. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Eric Smith. I actually serve here on the TouchPoint team. I have a fancy title that I don't really know what that means, account executive. Really what I do is I help our churches who are evaluating TouchPoint. So a lot of times before you made a decision to go with TouchPoint, you may have worked with myself or with Michael. And I also spend some time helping our churches with our new TouchPoint giving service. And I'll turn it over to Keith to introduce himself briefly. So Keith, can you share with us who haven't met you, who you are and what you do?
Sure. Serve as executive pastor at Village Bible Church. We're kind of a mid-sized church, multi-site church, 6 campuses in the western Chicago suburbs. And it's one of the reasons TouchPoint was a great fit for us because of the kind of the complexity of multi-site and different types of ministries at each location. So I've been at the church since '97, been on staff since 2005, and we've been using TouchPoint since the pandemic began. So the pandemic hit, and we went to TouchPoint the same day. So, it's easy to remember the start. So,
yes, and Keith, I have a really important question. Just
okay.
knowing that you're in the Chicago area,
Yeah,
and Summit's going to be there. So for those who are like me and enjoy pizza, what's the best? There's always a debate. What's the best?
I know there is the debate. The debate. Gino's is great. I can't remember what the plans are for Summit. Giordano's is great. I think I'm a Gino's guy. There's a lot of great pizza, So I think they're all pretty good. I'm going to go with Gino's though.
All right, and I could be wrong. I think Gino's is on the list for one of the things we're doing for Summit. So
I think it is.
If I'm wrong, Katie and Haley, you can let me know later, but I'm excited. I love Gino's myself. So all right, enough about pizza. Let's jump in. Let's talk about today's agenda. It's pretty straightforward. When we talk about adopting TouchPoint, there's really 3 things. It's all about buy-in, right? And it's from the top down. How do we find buy-in, starting with your staff? How does that funnel down to volunteers? And then, of course, for the whole church family, how do we find adoption for everybody within the church? And one of the things I was thinking about as we were just talking about what this is all going to look like, Keith, and what you're going to be sharing about your specific experience was honestly how I had to find buy-in for myself with getting started with TouchPoint. Been with the team here coming up on a year, but the past 7 or 8 years been serving churches in the church management space. But the reality is each program is different. And I know for everybody in the room that's used different software programs, every time you change, there's enough differences that it takes time and effort to get up to speed. And so I really did have to self-motivate myself, but that's partially because it's my job, right? I'm required to do that. And I don't want to be the guy who's giving a demonstration and being in that situation where the church feels like, man, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Who's ever been on a demo where someone's presented and it was pretty clear that person really didn't know the software? And so for me, that was enough self-motivation. But I started thinking from the dynamic of a church, it may not be like a volunteer's job, but how do we get that buy-in? And I'll never forget something that I heard from one of the churches that we worked with, where they said, no, it is their job as a volunteer. In fact, it was their church culture that if you were a volunteer, it wasn't that you could take attendance in the software, it was that you were required. That was literally part of the role of like a small group leader. You had to take attendance because that was part of the culture, because of the impact that those numbers had. And I'll just never forget that. But that's a small sample. And so obviously we want to hear from you, Keith, who you've been having to lead the charge here. And we are looking forward to just hearing about how you and Village Bible and those that you've talked with have gone through this. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over, Keith, and you can jump right in talking to us about buy-in.
Sounds great, Eric. Yeah, we talked about this at Summit, and what I did when I was first preparing this, and I'd say this is a slide deck that I'd like to see expand and grow and kind of be a living document because it's just best practices. And so you'll see names on these slides because when I was preparing it, I was asking other churches what was what were the big things that were important for them. And so we each have our own experiences. So some of these are from me, some of them are from other churches. This one here, Andy Johnson talked about, something that may not be all that relevant to people on this right along with us right now, because we were priority selected. But the very beginning stage, he reminded me of just the importance of not just deciding by yourself, but having a team around you, so that once the decision's made, there's a group that already has strong buy-in, a group that's already been through the process, and so you have a starting point. So that's kind of basic, but I think a lot of us maybe fail to do that to get that early buy-in. So that's a quick easy one. The second one is just the executive level buy-in. What we're talking about, a lot of times I think the executive level team at our churches, they want a management system that's working, and they know what they wanted to do, but they don't really, they think it's in the background behind the scenes, which it is if it's working well. But what we're talking about are things that will require buy-in at that higher level, so that when we're telling staff at lower levels that this is what we're doing, that there's full buy-in, that there's no wavering, there's no going to the other parent and saying, do we have to do this? There's full buy-in. So, basic things to start, but important starting points, team of buy-in, and then buy-in at that executive level. And that was from Valerie, kind of her experience asking for their full support. And we want all the staff to buy in and use it, and it's got to start at the top if we're going to achieve that. And then the next thing when it comes, it was just the initial implementation. This came from Monty Rivers down in Roswell, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, and he talked about that initial implementation. I want to let you mention some of the points on there. Eric, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, Keith. It's interesting because a lot of the times when I'm working with churches who are considering TouchPoint, I think everybody understands training, right? Training is your nuts and bolts. How do you do it? You click here, you click here, you click here. And training is important. I never want to belittle training, because you have to have that framework in order to use the software. But when we start getting into the idea of consulting and wondering, what that is and what's different, there really are some key differences, right? I mean, the training, when we talk about nuts and bolts, that gets you so far. But how many of us have been in those situations where we've realized, well, now that I've been trained up, I've found that there's 3 ways to do one task, and which of those 3 ways is best? And so, Keith, I'd love to hear from you too, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe that your team started with some training and kind of got to a point of realizing, there's a higher level of effectiveness that we want to get to, and at that point made some consideration for consulting, correct? Oh, did I lose you for a minute there, Keith?
You lost me. It's crazy. How did I have bad internet connection at church at the office? But I do. So
turns out it happens. What I was just asking, Keith, was that I believe your team started out with TouchPoint training, kind of got to a certain level and realized that there could be some higher level of usage, and that's where consulting kind of came to the table, correct?
Yeah, training. We had a great experience with the training process as far as going through, what's the software do? What do these functions do? And we got at the end of training and we realized, one of the challenges is just there's a translation that has to happen from one church management software to another. And so I realized partway through our training that I'm listening, I'm learning, but I'm not sure how this applies, because I was looking at it from the lens of the way we used to do it, the way our old software did it, the process, the terminology, and it was difficult to make the translation to TouchPoint. Again, I've used the analogy of if I've never used Photoshop, which I'm not a Photoshop user, it's got a lot of great tools, and somebody could teach me what all the buttons do. But until you tell me, why I'd want to use this button to create this effect, it may not make sense to me. And that's where the mix of training and consulting was really helpful for us, because, from a consulting standpoint, being able to ask the question, okay, not just what does this function do, but what do you need? What are your priorities? And that'll get to the next slide in a minute, but what are your priorities? And let's start figuring out, how do we accomplish those things? And then we'll come back to the things you've been trained on, how to use those functions to accomplish those goals. So I put this at the beginning of our time, Eric, because it's one of those early decisions. And I think I might have been, I was too cheap. I probably wasn't TouchPoint's advice. It was probably me being too cheap and too optimistic, thinking, you know what, just tell us just tell us how things work and we'll figure it out. We're smart people. Well, I got, partway through and realized it's not translating, it's not making sense. And that's when consulting came in and said, okay, let's start at some, the foundation level. What are you trying to accomplish? Yeah. And let's help you get through those. And I should clarify too, this quote on this screen isn't Monty Rivers. This was probably me, because of my experience in trying to do without consulting and realizing that that's well worth the cost, at least for us. We've got a small team, and we're trying to do a lot of stuff. And so, management system migration is a big process, really, for anybody, but with a small team, it was good to have extra help. So, that's
great.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I'd even say too, Keith, is I think your example is perfect in that, we recommend it. One of the things that I always tell our churches when they're getting started is, consulting is optional, but if it's in the budget, I'd think about it as not being optional because of the benefit that it really has. But at the end of the day, for those of you that are on the call, maybe you've been using TouchPoint for a few years, maybe you never have done consulting. It's never too late. And we will absolutely be able to help with certain projects, be able to walk alongside your team to just think about how to take things to the next level. So, if Q&A,
if I was talking to somebody that had just talked to you, Eric, I'd say, you know what? I know what Eric just told you, but I'm going to tell you something different. I'd say, if it's not in the budget, put it in the budget, because it's really important to have that extra hand holding and really strategy.
I think Keith froze on us again. While I'm waiting for him to come back, anyone who's interested in consulting, feel free to just throw in the word consulting into the Q&A there. We'll make sure someone follows up with you after it. And I guess it's easy for Keith to say, right, versus me. If it's not in the budget, put it in the budget. But I think the end thing to just mention here is we really do recommend, if you want to fully maximize TouchPoint, that something like consulting can be a great way to do that. And Keith, it looks like you're back.
Yep. I know. It'll come and go. I'm guessing. I don't know what's going on. We've got some storms going on here right now in Chicago. We got ice and sleet and hail. So it could be something related to that. Who knows? But we'll make it. We'll roll with it. So this next quote is Monty's quote, and prioritize the most value added. Then that's what I was saying. With consulting or without, what's the first most important thing? There's so much that TouchPoint does, and there's so many great things that we want to implement right now. And I think the important thing for somebody who's on the newer side of implementation or walking to the beginning of that process, say, what's the most important thing, and start there and start eating off, a bite at a time rather than trying to figure out how to do it all. So that was good advice from Monty.
Right.
Momentum, right? And again, I'd say this is at the beginning, but this is with anything, as we've rolled out new features in TouchPoint. How do you build momentum? And we've got a couple of things listed there. Rolling out new features to a beta team. I remember when we first rolled out the app, we invited the whole church via probably an email saying, hey, this is coming. If you want to participate in the early version and the beta version, let us know. And so it was two reasons. One, we wanted to figure out where the bugs were at. But even more than that, I wanted to get some feedback from people to use to promote it. Our voice is fine when we're talking about how great something is, but people expect the staff to say good things about, whatever the ministry or tool is, it's better to have, quotes from the people. And so rolling out to a beta team so you get some good feedback and to tell others, why it's useful. Rolling out to a larger group, with the app, we rolled it out second to our small groups, to our community groups, and kind of gave them the next level again. So we got more feedback, and then rolling out to the church. So I think, how do you build momentum? If it's the app, if it's some new functionality, if it's something with your if it's doing attendance for your small group leaders, if it's if it's different features and functions, if it's the classroom dashboard for your teachers, how do you do it in a way that builds momentum and builds champions for what you're doing? So, staging, rollout, and building momentum. All right. I was starting to wonder if they were all going to say Monty, because we had him on a couple slides there. I thought maybe we made a mistake, but
we're just trying to make him famous. That's all.
Yeah, that's good. It didn't look to see if he's on with us today, but if he is, maybe he'll feel good about that. So this one, is from Nathan, West Houston Chinese Church, and they were, I think, one of your first churches that had some unique language needs and Chinese language needs, and you guys did some custom things with them, and that kind of goes back to consulting. One of the things I was going to say when I froze up on you was, for us, we found it helpful that when we feel like we're at a spot where we need something that TouchPoint isn't built to do, picking up the phone and having a conversation with Andrew or one of the other consultants to say, this is what we'd like to do. Actually, I just had a conversation like this last week with Andrew, and said, I don't think TouchPoint does it, but can TouchPoint do it, or can we find a way to do it? And we may come back to that later, but that's consulting on the front end, but also consulting years down the road as you're trying to figure out other things. But this slide is different than that. This is talking about committing to one solution, and now I think we're getting to what's relevant to everybody on our call right now. And this is a hard one to implement. You have to have a lot of conviction. I don't know. Eric, remind me, you have kids?
2 boys.
How old are they?
They're 8 and 6.
Yeah. It's like when we parent with conviction and we're non-wavering, our kids don't even ask us after a while because they know the answer. But when we sometimes say yes, sometimes say no, they know our soft spots, right? And I know I'm a bad parent, but we never had video games. My kids are 13, 16, and 22. We never had video games. They never had phones when they were young, and they never really asked because they knew that the answer was no. And but there's other things that I would usually say no, but every once in a while in a weak moment say yes, and they know our weak points, right?
Yeah.
I may
get some tips from you, Keith, because I'm still trying to figure out how to parent well with conviction. It's hard.
It is hard. We want our kids to be happy, and we don't want to be the bad guy, and all the other kids have it, so I think that's true for our management, system as well. When we're implementing TouchPoint, it's like there are a lot of great tools out there. And one of the reasons most of us probably came to TouchPoint was because it allowed us to centralize to one database, one solution. And I have found, really, to be honest, Eric, I thought early on we would benefit from the one database and the one solution. But I thought, we're going to have there's going to be some shortcomings, but it's going to be worth it. In all reality, I found TouchPoint to really be, in most cases, the best solution, even compared to what we were using before, even the best in class other solutions. Yeah. But the reality is, even though it does a great job at a lot of things, people are used to using their pet solutions. If it's if it's for registration, if it's for care, if it's for prayer requests, whatever it is, if it's for email, if it's for text, everybody's got a solution that's working really well. And hey, can't I just keep using my solution, or can't we use our texting solution for student ministry because it's what we know? And my advice, and what I've heard from others, here's one from Valerie. I think she said it really well. Almost every existing person who was using something before TouchPoint, or every new person that comes onto your team, is not just a one-time rule, but every time you add somebody new to your staff, they're going to come with their tools that they really liked, and they're going to really want to use their tools. And Valerie said we've had to be forceful about saying no, and that we're sticking with our selection, and that they're required to learn and use it. And again, that goes back to our conversation earlier, having that executive level buy-in, having buy-in down the levels, because you're always going to have, it's always going to be an issue. People are always going to come and say, hey, I want to use this. And I don't know, do you see that, Eric? Has that been reality for you in your years?
I think so. And it is funny because those are conversations that happen before churches even make a decision to move to TouchPoint. Those are the open conversations. One of the questions I always ask is, well, what are you using today? Right. And it doesn't matter what database that I see that churches have come from, the common theme is that it's that database. And, but over the years, we started using MailChimp, and we started using fill in the blank. And some of that may be limitations on the software, but some of it was just because of preference, and there wasn't that backing from the staff saying no, right, on the no pet rule. And I'd love to open it up at this point to everybody listening. We throw it in the Q&A. If you have examples of this, if there's things that you've done that have been successful, throw them in the chat. We may get a chance to address some of them at Q&A. But yeah, Keith, I mean, I think this probably, my guess would be most on the call have had many examples of this exact thing with any implementation they've gone through, or even with the tool that they're using today. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, and it also goes back to you may feel like what you're using is the best tool, and maybe as the one who maybe you're leading the TouchPoint process. Maybe you're in charge of the whole thing, and maybe you don't know how to do it on TouchPoint. And that goes back to reaching out and asking. I know when we went live with TouchPoint in 2020, we were really happy with the background check company, Ministry Safe, who we were using, and that wasn't one of the integrations that TouchPoint had. And so I knew at some point we would get to the question of, do we need to change? Because again, one database is really helpful to be able to know who in your database is serving in children's ministry that's background check, rather than having two databases. And so that wasn't one of the options. And yet reaching out and asking what it would take to make that happen, and then there ended up being some other churches that reached out and had the same requests, and were able to, and sometimes that's one of the great things about the TouchPoint community is we can come together and say, okay, here's a couple of churches that need this. How can we help fund this process? How can we help make this come to reality? And it's not just me, but there's a couple of us, and so, so we never had to actually leave Ministry Safe, because TouchPoint ended up doing an integration with Ministry Safe, which has been great to have that in one place. But, so going back to the point of, if it doesn't seem like it's an option, it's always good to ask and brainstorm.
It is always good to ask. And what we're not saying here is anytime that Keith asks, we just start something new for him. But he's got a great point that the more that we hear from multiple church partners that those needs are similar, the more that obviously gets our attention, rises to the surface. And I think that's just a great example of where we were able to find a win. We were able to find a win for multiple churches.
Well, and I did say that multiple churches could come together with the resources to pay to have it done. So, if you get enough churches with enough resources, right? So, it'll get done. So,
hard conversations, Keith.
Hard conversations. Yeah, and I think, that's with anything, right? And I think we all learn as leaders that it's better to have the hard conversations and assume that they'll go away. And one of the things with any change, especially software, but any change, is, things are different, and there's things we liked about the old better. At least it felt more comfortable. It's what we knew. And whatever the change is, if it's a change to your building, if it's changed your ministries, if it changed your software, people are going to grumble. And I think the important thing as leaders is to remember to be willing to stop and have those harder conversations and encourage people to not do that. It's not productive. It's not productive to complain about, this, the way things are versus the way they were. If we can be, positive and working together, we'll accomplish a lot more. And really, I think I have this mentioned later on, but that's one of the things I really like about bringing our team to Summit. Because when you come to Summit, you hear from other churches the ways they're implementing things and the things they're excited about, and so that's a great reason to come. Just to people want to be part of a winning team, and it's great to come to be with a group of a bunch of people who are using the same tools and doing things different ways. And you realize, what? Yeah, nothing's perfect. My church is far from perfect, right? But it's really good. There's a lot of good things about it. TouchPoint's far from perfect, but it's really good. There's a lot of great things about it. And when you hear how other people are utilizing and doing great things with you, you're like, this is good. This is a good team to be part of. So have the hard conversations, though. Look at that. It's like we were planning ahead, Eric.
I think we were.
Everyone wants to be part of a winning team. And well, it looks like I just did this slide and didn't even know it. That's good.
I think you did. And I mean, I'm gonna plug it, even though Keith just did. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm still fairly new to the TouchPoint team, but Summit was my first experience of seeing how our church partners were sharing best practices, talking about what's working, what's not working. And when we're going to talk about some other things in a few slides here on how we're trying to make that even more effective for our churches outside of Summit. But what a great way to do that in person. So for those of you who aren't aware, it's happening this September in Chicago, and we'd love for y'all to be there.
So I bring everybody that I can from our team that uses TouchPoint. I can't remember. I think we had 8 or 9 people there last year down in, were we in Dallas? No, we were in Austin last year. Mm-hmm. And that's good. And it's also good for your team members that, who realize they've got something to offer to be able to help others too. You'll be sitting at a table and you'll learn ideas from one church, and another church will learn ideas from you, and you realize you've got some knowledge to offer. So bring your team, and we'll see who has the most people there.
Yeah, come on down. Yeah, one of the things I'll mention here on this next slide is about training staff on new features, and it's not just the new features, but TouchPoint in general. And I saw some great questions coming in, really comments from Elliot and Denise, and I hope we can get to those at the end, just with some more feedback. But one of the things that I just want to make sure everybody's aware of is that TouchPoint has new feature webinars. In fact, our next, I think it's next month is our next one. So be on the lookout for that, because we're going to talk about the features that are coming. And, it's in some ways, it makes me sad when I have a conversation where there was a case where a church didn't know of a feature that we had, right? They've been using TouchPoint for a while and just didn't know it existed. And part of that may be on us, right? And we want to do as good of a job as we can to communicate, but we also want to encourage everyone, right? When you see those webinars coming up, invite your staff, get them trained up, because we want to make sure that you can take advantage of what we're rolling out. And Keith, I'd love to hear how you may highlight those for your staff.
Yeah, and let me just clarify too. I got Valerie on a bunch of these slides. If Valerie's on with this, I don't think these quotes are all Valerie, so I must have made a mistake in sending information. These are all real quotes from somebody, not necessarily Valerie. Yeah. So our database manager, Missy, one of the things I've asked her to do, we gather every 2 weeks, our team together that is involved with those centralized services types of functions. And which a lot of that involves TouchPoint. And I've asked her every 2 weeks to share what are the new things. I want everybody to watch the webinars and know what's happening, but the reality is we don't always get around to it. People, miss it or this or that. Sure. So I want her to be the one that's always for sure watching and is bringing to the group the things that are talked about, and then they can go back and watch if they want more details. But otherwise, there's so many things. You guys are doing a great job at developing tools and building on what's there. And there's a lot of great things that are easy to miss you're talking about them, but we have to listen. And so assigning somebody on your team to make sure they're listening and then bringing those things to the team for us has been really helpful. So we don't miss stuff.
Yeah, great. And for those that aren't aware, speaking of new features, processes, one of the ones that I'm most excited about. So I don't know how much we'll be talking about it specifically in this next webinar, but there's some great things coming.
Yeah.
So one of the next things that we wanted to talk about is just how to invest in making TouchPoint even better for your team. And there are options for those that aren't aware to build on TouchPoint outside of what you get out of the box. So this is going back to what I typically mention again when churches are evaluating TouchPoint, which is you can kind of look at software in a few different lenses. You can look at ones that, have a really good out of the box solution, but what comes out of the box is what you get. That's it, right? And then you have other softwares that can be super highly customizable, but sometimes in order to get a ton of value out of that, you have to have a lot of time, a lot of effort into customizing it the way that makes sense for your team, and potentially even have people on staff that know coding skills. And so I'll tell you what, shout outs, because I've seen some of these guys. So James up at 10th, Ben up at First Hendersonville. Those are the types of guys that I've seen that they can get in there and they can actually build upon TouchPoint, because we open up the ability for you to access Python and the ability for you, if you know HTML, to make some really cool giving pages. So there's actually things that can be done outside of what you get just out of the box with TouchPoint. And that's things that you can do if you have somebody like a Ben or a James on staff, or if you don't, those are things that you can actually hire TouchPoint to help with. And part of that just comes with, what are you envisioning? What else do you want to see happen in TouchPoint? And you may be surprised to find out that there's some things that we may be able to make work for you. So Keith, any thoughts on that? And I believe you had actually hired Andrew to do a little bit of that specific custom build out as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we've hired TouchPoint for. One, we asked if we could pay for the development on one of the kiosk modes in check-in is the I forget what it's called, but it's the scan only kiosk mode where you don't have a touchpad on the screen at all. That really, for us, we wanted that so we could really force people to the app for using a pre-check, just to get them using the app and speed up even more the check-in process. So that was one. But I think maybe the one you're talking about too, we asked Andrew, we really wanted to have a way to automate follow up with people who hadn't been connected with. And it started during the pandemic, but we've continued it. We want to make sure that all of our people that would call this church their home have some type of connection once every 3 weeks, either because they come to church or to small group, or they serve somewhere, or because people on our care team are reaching out to them. And so every week, our care team, our elders and their wives get a email of people in their flock who haven't had a connection in the last 3 weeks. And so they know, who needs to be followed up with, and then they'll go in and record that in TouchPoint, those phone calls or those visits. But it just helped us to make sure people don't fall through the cracks. And in that case, it wasn't creating something new as much as Andrew helped us to create scripts and some automated emails and using what was in TouchPoint already. But we just didn't know how to make it happen, and so it just happens every Friday. That email goes out to everybody that's on that elder care team, and lists people in their flock that haven't had a connection in the last 20 days, and they know who to reach out to. So yeah, that was important for us and really valuable during COVID to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing. And as we jump to the next slide, I'm actually going to read one of the comments that came in from Jace Brown. Jace, you had spoken to what we want to bring up here. So Jace said the TouchPoint Discord has been super helpful for us as we talk with other church partners on how they're utilizing the system. And so with that said, this is what Jace is talking about. We have recently launched a community through Discord. For those of you who are or are not familiar with Discord, it's just been a way for our churches to get on, start asking questions, sharing best practices. Funny enough, I mentioned James and Ben. Turns out they're getting famous here on the screenshot as well. But this has just been a super cool way for us to see how those best practices are being shared from partner to partner. And I'll be really curious when we get to Summit this next year, just to hear more on how that's been helping everybody. So Jace, thank you for sharing your experience with Discord so far. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this yet, feel free to go ahead and just type in Discord in the Q&A, and we'll make sure someone follows up with you on that too.
That kind of leads into what Elliot brought up in the Q&A, and he said, it's critical to create training for how your church uses TouchPoint. And I think, that's true if it's for the database people who are entering information, so that there's consistency, is what I think James was referring to. Because if you're not getting good information in, you're not going to get good information out, and that creates, like James said, or Elliot said, the trust of the system. So you want consistency with people who are on the back end, putting information in and using it. But I think the training also goes for the people who are using it, the end users, training that shows people how easy it is to give on the app, or to do a registration, or to look at a directory of people and their involvements, or having good training for how to use the functions, rather than just assuming that information will trickle down, because a lot of times it doesn't, and people get frustrated because they don't know how to do it and the way you design it to be used. So
yeah,
training is important.
Well, Keith, I think you and I may have to fly these next few slides, because we definitely want a few minutes for Q&A at the end. Yep. But I think we're getting close. So I'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts on the volunteers and church body and getting the buy-in there.
Yeah. I think the key here kind of ties in with what we just talked about when it comes to training, teaching people, showing them, helping them to be excited about it, teaching people to use, TouchPoint for everything. What can you always push people back to the same tools? For us, the app is kind of our central point. So on Sunday morning, we're telling people how to, to sign up for what events, this or that, or give, or whatever. We're always saying, do it on the app, do it on the app, do it on the app. It makes it easy. It's one simple communication. People know where they're going. They can register for things on the website, which will take them to the TouchPoint registration forms, but we always communicate the app. The same thing, small group attendance, small group leaders, go to the app, all these things. How do you continue to teach, show, and excite people about what their options are and how to do it, and continue to communicate? People, you think you communicate about it this month, but you're going to have new people there in 3 months who've never heard about it. So you got to continue to educate and communicate. And I think, your last slide there is using TouchPoint everywhere, and using it for everything. And that's where I was talking about, we want our people to pre-check via the app, not just because pre-check is great and convenient, but because it gets them in the app. We want them to sign up for things in the app, because again, it goes back to the same thing. How can we get people using the tools consistently, demonstrating? This goes back to the training we talked about earlier, how to do things, that are built in, and not just assume that people will figure it out, because people, one, won't know the tool functions are there. And if they do see them, they won't necessarily know how to use them, in the ways that you've designed. So having some video clips to do that. So, ongoing training, ongoing promotion, and that's important. People forget, and you've got new people coming in all the time. And so.
Well, awesome. I think we're about wrapped up and ready to tackle any questions. This is your chance to ask questions to Keith Duff, the expert. Not me. I'm making Keith answer everything. So anything that comes in, Keith, is on you. And actually, I'll tell you what, while we're waiting on any questions, I'm gonna throw a curveball here, Keith, and ask you this. With your rollout of TouchPoint and establishing buy-in, what was the one most difficult part of that? And what'd you do to overcome it?
Well, I think the most difficult part for us was we transitioned at a wonky time. We transitioned in March of 2020 when things were shutting down, and then when I talked earlier about the value of consulting, we had trouble translating, figuring out how do we do the basics. And so I'd say the first 6 months for us were hard, not so much because of the pandemic, but because we were trying to figure out, and we needed somebody to translate for us. And so I'd say for us, what was important was continuing to remain positive, continuing to be confident that this was the right choice, continue to be confident this is going to work, and be the cheerleader when, because when you start change, people are resistant, and it's easy to be a naysayer, and continuing to cheerlead, continue to be confident, and continuing to push forward, to persevere. And and that's that for us, that was important.
Good. Awesome. Well, Keith, thank you. I'm looking through some of the questions here, and I think you had answered several of these. I know a lot of people did ask about Discord, so absolutely we'll make sure to get you some information on that. Glad to hear that there's some interest on that front. And Keith, it was definitely helpful just to hear from you firsthand. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other stories out there. Maybe this year at Summit, we can that can be another topic to just talk about best practices on finding that buy-in. But I think that may be it for questions, unless Keith, you're seeing.
I would just say, when we started off, I said, this type of slide deck, I think, is useful over time. And the more we can build it out with ideas of what's been important to others. You asked me to come on because I think, Eric, you wanted a voice of, what's worked for others. And I pulled in ideas from other churches beyond ours. And I would just say, if you're watching live or watching this in replay and you have ideas that we didn't talk about, I mean, this is one of the great things about the TouchPoint community, is learning from each other. And so I'd say, reply to the email. If you're on right now, put it in the chat, or later on, reply to the email with the replay, and Katie or whoever gets those responses will consolidate them. But I'd love to add more things to a deck like this and be able to share it. Eric, if you're rolling out a church, or for churches that have been using TouchPoint for a long time, we can always continue to come back to basics and go from there. So
yeah, great. And who knows, maybe we need to start a Discord community with the title buy-in and see what other examples we find. But I think we're at the end of our time here. So Keith, thank you so much for jumping on and just sharing some of your wisdom and what your team has encountered. And for everybody that's on, thank you all for joining. We'll have a recording of this, and be on the lookout for some communication for those who wanted some additional information.
Sounds good, everybody. Eric. Thanks everybody for your feedback, and look forward to seeing you here in Chicago at Summit. And thanks for the ways everybody contributes to make this a great community.